In June 1943, the Imperial Japanese Navy's dreadnought battleship Mutsu was destroyed by a sudden magazine explosion while anchored in Hiroshima Bay. At 12:13 on the 8th of June 1943, one of Mutsu's own gun magazines detonated, cutting her hull in two and causing the forward section to capsize almost immediately. The Imperial Navy officially attributed the explosion to an act of sabotage by a disgruntled seaman and suppressed news of the disaster to prevent a loss of morale. Explore Mutsu's development and service, the circumstances of her sinking, the subsequent investigation, and the legacy of this wartime mystery. Mutsu was the second and final ship of Japan's Nagato class of dreadnought battleships. She was laid down in June 1918 at the Yokosuka Naval Arsenal and launched on the 31st of May 1920. Commissioned on the 24th of October 1921, Mutsu had a displacement of 32,000 tons at full load. She measured 707 feet in overall length and a beam of 95 feet. Her designed crew complement was about 1,330 officers and men, rising to roughly 1,475 by 1942. In the late 1920s and 1930s, Mutsu underwent major reconstruction that lengthened and strengthened her hull. A 1927 refit extended her bow by 5 feet, and a more extensive rebuild from 1934 to 1936 added 22 feet to her stern with torpedo bulges for extra protection and buoyancy. After these upgrades, her full load displacement increased to about 39,000 tons. The reconstruction also modernized her superstructure into the characteristic Japanese pagoda mast and replaced her boilers. Originally driven by 4 geared steam turbines rated at 80,000 shaft horsepower. After the 1930s refit with newer boilers, she could sustain nearly 25 knots at about 82,000 shaft horsepower in sea trials. Mutsu carried a powerful main armament of 8 16.1-inch guns mounted in 4 twin turrets, 2 forward and 2 aft. These guns fired Special Type 3 Sanshikidan anti-aircraft shrapnel shells, as well as armor-piercing rounds. Her secondary armament consisted of 18 5.5-inch guns in casemate mounts along the hull sides and superstructure. During the 1930s refits, Mutsu's anti-aircraft battery was considerably increased with multiple twin 127mm guns, twin 40mm pom-pom mounts, and numerous 25mm cannons. But the core layout of main and secondary batteries remained the same. Mutsu was well armoured for her era. A thick cemented steel belt up to 12 inches covered the main hull, tapering down toward the lower edge. In short, Mutsu embodied the cutting-edge dreadnought design of the early 20th century, combining heavy firepower with strong armour and a high speed considering her specifications. Mutsu entered service during a turbulent naval arms era. In late 1921, while she was fitting out, the Washington Naval Conference proposed scrapping many capital ships. Japan negotiated to keep Mutsu by retiring the obsolete battleship Setsu instead. Following her commissioning, Mutsu served as a flagship in the 1st Battleship Division. In peacetime, she took part in fleet maneuvers and reviews. Notably, in September 1923, Mutsu was one of the ships that loaded and delivered supplies for survivors of the Great Kanto earthquake. She also conducted gunnery practice, including sinking the hulk of the old battleship Satsuma in 1924 as per treaty limits. In the mid-1930s, after reconstruction, she resumed frontline duty and even supported Japan's actions in China. In August 1937, Mutsu transported about 2,000 troops to Shanghai and launched seaplanes against targets during the early phase of the Second Sino-Japanese War. By late 1939, she had been placed in reserve for a time, but was refitted in early 1941 in preparation for the wider Pacific conflict. At the outbreak of the Pacific War, Mutsu saw limited action. From the 8th to the 14th of December 1941, she sortied south with the battleship force as distant support for the Pearl Harbor strike, but did not engage any enemy ships. In mid-January 1942, Mutsu towed the obsolete armoured cruiser Nishin to be used as a target by the new battleship Yamato. The Nishin was promptly sunk in that exercise. In June 1942, she was part of the main battle line at the Battle of Midway under Admiral Gunji Kogure. The ship did not see combat at Midway, though some of the carrier aircraft survivors from the Kido Butai, the 1st Air Fleet, were transferred aboard Mutsu on the 6th of June and taken back to Japan, and she returned safely to Hashirajima by the 14th of June. Later in 1942, Mutsu deployed briefly to the Central Pacific. In late August 1942, she was assigned to a covering force based at Truk for the Guadalcanal campaign. During the Battle of the Eastern Solomons on the 27th of August, Mutsu's crew fired 4 main gun rounds at a US reconnaissance plane, the only time her 41cm guns were used in combat during the war. She then returned to Truk on the 2nd of September. In October 1942, Mutsu offloaded excess fuel oil to an oiler to support other ships around Guadalcanal. By early January 1943, she was back in Japan. In April 1943, Mutsu steamed from Hashirajima to Kure to take on munitions for a planned reinforcement of Japanese garrisons in the Aleutians, but that operation was cancelled the next day. Mutsu then resumed training and reserve duty in the inland sea, unaware that her next voyage would never be undertaken. In the late morning of the 8th of June 1943, Mutsu lay at anchor in the Hashirajima Fleet anchorage in Hiroshima Bay, alongside the battleship Fuso and other warships. A total of 113 naval flight cadets from the Tsuchiura Naval Air Group and 40 instructors were on board for familiarization training. At 12:13, the magazine of Mutsu's No. 3 gun turret suddenly exploded. The blast was devastating. It destroyed the surrounding superstructure and sliced the 750-foot ship in two. Seawater rushed into the open machinery spaces, causing the forward 150-meter section to capsize rapidly to starboard and sink almost immediately. The remaining 45-meter stern section stayed afloat for several hours. It eventually upended and sank at about 2 o'clock on the 9th of June, coming to rest only a few hundred feet south of the main wreck site. Nearby Japanese ships launched rescue efforts at once. Destroyers Tamanami and Wakatsuki and the cruisers Tatsuta and Mogami, along with small boats from Fuso, picked up survivors. In total, 353 men were rescued from Mutsu's crew and passengers. Only 13 of the visiting aviators were among the survivors. The rest of the Mutsu complement, 1,121 men, went down with the ship. In the immediate aftermath, Japanese vessels even conducted an anti-submarine search around the anchorage to rule out an enemy attack. No submarine or external cause was found. On the morning of the 9th of June, divers located the bodies of Mutsu's captain, Teruhiko Miyoshi, and her executive officer, Koro Ono. Both were recovered and later posthumously promoted, as was naval custom. Notably, Captain Miyoshi's wife was not notified of his death until January 1944, reflecting the secrecy surrounding the incident. By early evening on the 9th of June, the wreck of Mutsu had settled on the harbour bottom. The Japanese Navy decided not to attempt immediate salvage. The shock and loss prompted the highest levels of command to keep the disaster secret. The destruction of a battleship in home waters was officially suppressed to avoid undermining public morale. Mass cremations of recovered bodies began at once, and the survivors were quietly dispersed to other units in the Pacific. In Japanese records, the ship's sinking was not announced, and her loss would not be publicly acknowledged until after the war. On the 11th of June 1943, 3 days after the explosion, the Navy convened a special commission, headed by Admiral Koichi Shiozawa, to investigate the cause of the disaster. The inquiry considered several possibilities. First, enemy sabotage was ruled out. Heavy security at the anchorage and the complete lack of any enemy claim made that hypothesis unlikely. A submarine or midget submarine attack was similarly discounted after extensive patrols failed to locate any attacker, and no Allied force claimed sinking a Japanese ship at Hashirajima on that date. Eyewitnesses reported seeing a reddish-brown fireball above the ship at the time of the explosion, which was characteristic of a magazine detonation rather than an external torpedo hit. The investigators focused on internal causes. One scenario was an intentional act by a crew member. The commission noted that a petty officer in the number 3 turret had recently been accused of theft and was believed to be in despair. While no culprit was identified or charged, the commission's report would ultimately conclude that the blast was, most likely, set off by this disgruntled sailor. Another hypothesis was accidental. Mutsu carried special Type 3 Sanshikidan anti-aircraft incendiary shells in her magazines. These shells contained many small tubes of incendiary material, and a past fire at the Sagami arsenal had been blamed on them. The Navy tested salvaged shells from Mutsu's number 3 turret under controlled conditions. Those experiments, using a model turret and recovered charges, showed that under normal conditions, the shells did not detonate spontaneously. No evidence of any internal fire or malfunction was found by the divers who inspected the wreck after the fact. The investigative board issued its interim findings on the 25th of June 1943. It announced that a disgruntled seaman in the turret had most likely caused the explosion. In other words, the official position blamed sabotage from within the crew, rather than enemy action or a technical fault. The commission did not release detailed proof, and no individual was publicly named. With this conclusion, the inquiry was closed, and the incident was treated as an internal tragedy. Decades later, some analysts would continue to question aspects of the case, but the wartime report remains the primary source. In the months after Mutsu sank, the Imperial Navy took deliberate steps to cover up the event. The ship was removed from the Navy list on the 1st of September 1943. Survivors of Mutsu were quietly reassigned to distant posts and fleets to minimize talk of the disaster. By July 1944, the sunken battleship was yielding valuable resources. Divers recovered about 580 metric tons of fuel oil from the wreck to supplement Japan's depleted supply. After World War II, the remains of Mutsu became an object of salvage and remembrance. In 1953, divers raised the large 1.2-meter chrysanthemum imperial emblem from the bow, though it was later lost or scrapped. One of Mutsu's casemate guns was salvaged in 1963 and donated to the Yasukuni Shrine for display. Beginning in 1970, the Fakada Salvage Company undertook large-scale recovery operations. By 1978, they had scrapped roughly 75% of the wreck for its low background steel, sought after for nuclear research. Salvages raised both aft triple-gun turrets in 1970 to 71, along with the propellers, rudders, and other equipment. In total, 849 bodies of crewmen lost in the explosion were recovered during the salvage effort. Eventually, the remaining hull fragments were broken up or buried. Only a short 35-meter section of Mutsu's structure, from amidships forward, still lies on the seabed, with its highest point about 12 meters below the surface. In all, the story of Mutsu stands as a sober chapter of naval history. A powerful battleship, lost not in battle, but to a sudden, internally born catastrophe whose full truth may never be known.